It's Linda Lippin from Linda Lippin Pilates, the Pilates Teacher Mastermind, and Strong Phone. I am here today with my friend Annmarie Cross. Is it Monday morning for you, Annmarie?
It is Monday morning.
So Annmarie is over in Australia, where it is already tomorrow. Because as we know, time is very nebulous anyway. And we all kind of made it up. We can be here at the same time on different days. And it all works. Now, Annmarie is a brand strategist and is known in many business circles as the podcast queen. I have actually brought Annmarie specifically here today to talk to us about podcasting. Podcasting is such a great way of building your brand on social media, of positioning yourself as a thought leader, and of making your work available to larger and larger audiences. And Annmarie has been voted one of the top 20 business coaches in Australia, which is so huge. And I'm so proud because I know you.
And vice versa. You're doing some awesome work in the space of helping Pilates owners, business owners.
Yeah, it's Pilates teachers have really needed help since COVID. It's been extraordinarily trying time. I don't know if you know this, but here in New York, we are having ridiculous Omicron numbers now. We are back to masking in Pilates studios and gyms, vaccinated or not. And, we are once again at that place where it is an issue. And I think what Pilates teachers really need to be thinking about, as all coaches and professionals need to be doing, is building that online presence. And podcasting, I know for me, has been a huge piece of that. And even though I haven't quite turned this into a podcast yet, because there's a difference between a live stream and a podcast. Yes. And we are going to talk about all the things with Annmarie today. So Annmarie, welcome. Introduce yourself again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Linda, for inviting me. So the podcasting queen was not a label I gave myself, not a name I gave myself, but rather something that people started to call me many years ago because I loved that space. I started when I was in the career industry as a career coach. And in 2008, the global financial crisis hit. And a colleague and I was just tired of the doom and gloom that mainstream media continued to share. And we knew things were difficult. We knew things would take longer to find a job, but we knew things were not hopeless. So we said, we need to be the voice of hope and inspiration. So we started Career Success Radio, had no idea what we were doing, but we did it anyway because the message was so important to get out. And, kind of 13 years later, many podcast episodes later, I've learned all of the mistakes or learned through doing all of the mistakes and then some. And now it's a pleasure and an honor to be able to share what I did, wouldn't do again, and so that people can really start to make a much bigger impact in the world with their message, while also begin to nurture listeners into leads and ultimately clients and build their business.
Well, that sounds awesome. So how much work is it to start a podcast? What do you have to do?
Well, I think if you get the right strategy in place and your podcast starts to generate the kind of results that you want, then the work that you put up front and ongoing is worth it. It's like anything in business, isn't it? And it's quite easy. I'll give this analogy. It's very simple to start a business, really. I mean, obviously there's some requirements that you have to do and get in place, and then you launch your business. But then launching a business that generates clients, that doesn't wear you out, that you don't feel like you're doing a million different things at the one time, being stretched too thin, versus building a business that is profitable, that builds momentum and that grows steadily, two different things. Similarly with a podcast, quite simple to launch a podcast, but a podcast that generates results, that's another story. And Career Success Radio, as I mentioned, I started back in 2008 with a co-host. We met incredible people. We built an audience of listeners from around the globe. And that time, tools such as Facebook and Twitter were starting to be invented. It's showing my age here. But we started to leverage those tools to be able to amplify the message even further. So we build influence, and we certainly build impact and connections, but we struggle to monetize that. And that was one of the main reasons why we stopped. Because of all of the work that we put into it, we weren't able to generate those leads. And so to answer your question, it's simple, really, relatively simple to start. We've got lots of tools and technologies, but if it's not going to generate results, often what you find is people, they come out of the gate, they're regularly producing podcast episodes, and then it goes less and less and less to they give up, So
that's what I see a lot of. Prior to this interview, I thought I would just go in and look at some Pilates podcasts in general. And what I saw were a lot of people who had started podcasting were posting weekly, maybe twice a month, and then just stopped.
Yeah.
Or maybe posting quarterly at this point. And it does feel like there's a huge disconnect there.
I also found that there were some teachers who were posting things that didn't really go along with what they sell. That were kind of interesting,
but I didn't
quite understand how they were using the podcast in their business or with their business.
For example,
having a podcast geared towards Pilates teachers when their client avatar is clearly a consumer.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. One of the reasons I think that they do that is because, and we did this too, we compared podcasting with mainstream radio. Audio platform. I mean, now, of course, we've got the technology that allows us to stream and then be able to strip the audio and then, create an audio podcast. There are video podcasts too, by the way. But they compare it to mainstream radio and they think, because I've spoken to businesses, even corporations who've started a podcast for their business, they interview a number of different people who they think would be of interest to an audience, and then they add adverts, sponsor adverts, and that sponsor adverts is their particular client and or for their ideal client. I'll give you an example. A fitness instructor who wanted to help businesses, but he was talking with guests about all sorts of other business things. And then at the end, he said, by the way, if you're a business and you'd like to get fit, come to my studio or here's some more information. Now, you've just said that something that's so important, the audience you attract to your podcast should be an audience of your ideal clients.
Right. And so many, for me, as you know, because yes, my friends, Annmarie is also a member of the Advance. So she knows me well. She's in my networking pod. She has heard my tips many, many, many times, as I have heard hers. And so she knows that I serve two markets, that I do serve Pilates teachers as well as Pilates consumers, right? So I can ride that line. But I would actually think that even for somebody like me, it might make more sense to have two separate podcasts.
Well, that's interesting there. I had one client who was a physiotherapist, and she had two different clients. She had business clients who were obviously feeling the impact of hunching over their technology, and so would give them different techniques and things that they could do during the day to help loosen their muscles and so forth. Her other passion was working with children, because she said, if I can get them in the classroom and teach them the habits, then as an adult, they won't continue to put a burden on, their hands, because statistics were showing that, or she was finding, she was working with her clients or patients that were younger and younger and younger. And so she said, if I can get them in the classroom, I'll be able to support them. So what we did, rather than doing two separate podcasts, because that quite some work, is we looked at what were some of the common themes. And you can use this too, Linda, and others who may have two different markets, but kind of there's a common theme that runs in between. So if you have a look at the market, in her case of young students, and then a market of business owners, there's some similarities to the topics that she would be sharing. And so you want to segue them together. So you might say, so this is relevant for you if you are a parent, because obviously your target market is going to be parents or teachers who would get her in to teach at the schools, and then also business owners. So she would kind of call them out, say, this is relevant for you if you're a teacher or a parent who's worried about some of the ways your children may be holding their phones, and you want to teach some easy techniques. And by the way, business owners, you should be doing this in your business now as well. And then she would move. So she would do a call out specifically and tell them why this is relevant to them. You want to do that. You want to segue to bring people into that conversation. And that's what I would recommend that you do, rather than have two separate podcasts.
Interesting. In terms of, I think people are usually really cowed too, because we all listen to popular podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we're listening to these podcasts that have millions of followers and, tons of ads and all kinds of craziness. And then we're like, how do we find our place? How do we find our way? How do we find our people in the midst of all of that noise and all of that kind of podcast, craziness? If you go on the iTunes podcast store, if you go on Spotify, if you're on Audible, wherever you are, there are just, thousands and thousands and thousands of podcasts. But I'm kind of heartened by the fact that it doesn't actually take that many listeners to be amongst the top percentage of podcasts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Am I right about
it's interesting that it's such a great point. I'm glad you brought this up, because it can be quite daunting if you think about the number of podcasts that have been added to the space. However, be mindful that podcasts still, if you compare it to, say, how many videos are on YouTube and many of the other platforms, podcasting is still relatively a space where more and more people are listening. So that's fantastic. But what we say in business, and this is so true with a podcast too, don't worry too much and focus so much on what we call vanity metrics, because vanity metrics really are not the metrics that are going to generate clients. Rather, have a highly niched podcast that speaks to an audience of your ideal client, and rather build what I call reputation equity, because reputation equity is going to be shared. It's going to make a listener who comes for the topic then hears you, even if you're sharing a guest, come back, because the way you interact with your guest or the way that you share your information resonates with them. So that one person becomes two, becomes four, becomes eight. It's that multiplying effect. Vanity metrics are not bankable unless you're following a mainstream media method or business model, because then you can add ads in there. And I've created what I call, and this is after observing podcasts, smaller niche podcasts right through to highly listened to podcasts and even mainstream radio, and I call it my podcast positioning quadrant. And I can share a little bit more information. Obviously, we haven't got time today, but there is a quadrant of celebrity, and then there's a quadrant of trusted authority, and they're opposite each other. Celebrity has a high audience, but they're not seen as a trusted authority. They're not seen as a thought leader. So you would not hire a celebrity host, podcast host, to do your taxes or to represent you in a court of law, but you would use and invest in a trusted authority if you had back pain and you had been trying everything, yet that back pain kept coming back. And you heard about this wonderful Pilates instructor called Linda Lippin. who worked specifically with women over the age of 50. You would invest in her because you've listened to her podcast. She
Full
knows.
disclosure, Annemarie
Yeah.
has done some of my exercises.
Yes, and I forwarded them on. Exactly. So that's what I'm talking about with a trusted authority. And so often we feel that we have to come out, launch our podcast and then have 1 million downloads. I would rather have 100 downloads, people investing in my services, people benefiting from the content that I share and sharing that. And that will slowly build the momentum that you need to build that audience of people who know, like, and trust you, and who will become clients when they're ready to make a decision. You become the choice versus just a choice amongst a sea of, hundreds and thousands of other podcasts.
Right. And then you also become kind of top of mind for people, so that when they're having that moment of, oh, I need this now, it's like, oh, right, Annemarie from that podcast. Okay.
Yes.
And I'm also thinking about when you talked about celebrity versus being more specialized, and I was thinking about, like, our friend Suzanne Mariga, who, is a brilliant profit first CPA, also has a great profit first podcast.
Yeah.
Right? So there's an example of somebody who is out there, who is being a thought leader in her space, and then really is bringing people back to her specific business and her niche.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that then becomes somebody you would hire. So if you are a specialist in something, this is now a space to be creative. What about doing solo podcast versus guest podcast?
It's interesting because years ago, I only had interview podcast, guest podcast, because I'm an introvert. So for me, it was a way that I connected and built relationships with people. And I just learned so much from my awesome guests. And then I remember having a conversation with one of my close colleagues. And I said to her, do you think I should do a solo show? And she said, well, I know that I've listened to a couple of episodes from people that I follow. And I always love it when they're, speaking on their own. So I thought, okay, I'll do a solo show. That solo show got so many more downloads and listens than any of my interview podcasts in a shorter amount of time. So that was a huge lesson to me that, yes, people were quite interested in listening to what I had to say too, and not just my guests. So I think a blend, and this is one thing that I'll say, there are no rules to podcasting other than the rules you set yourself. And those rules are going to be determined by the outcome that you want, the time that you have to dedicate to put the podcast together, and what suits your business model. And so what you don't want to do is what I did, and that was what my message got lost in the noise of my own podcast, because I wasn't really clear on where I wanted to position myself, had lots of great guests. And this was for a top podcast, one of my podcasts, which was an award-winning podcast and was listed in the top, entrepreneurship and marketing. My message still got lost in the noise. And it wasn't until I got clear on where I wanted to position myself that then determined the guest strategy that I had in place. It enabled me to weave in some solo shows that were very much targeted to where I wanted to place my expertise. So a blend of those two things, guesting and solo shows, tends to work really well for me anyway, because that's kind of the outcome that I want. I still want to use podcasts as a way to connect with my ideal referral partners, or there might be a collaboration opportunities, as well as obviously there's guests who have great content that I really want to share with my audience. But I also weave in some solo shows in there too.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot. I listen to Ali Brown's podcast, I listen to Kelly's podcast, and it's all a mix of solo.
Yeah.
Kind of more educational pieces, and then you have the interviews.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, which are, just a slightly different tone, a slightly different learning.
Yes.
I think, as outcomes from those. If somebody wanted to start a podcast, do you have any software or platform recommendations for people who are just starting? Because I know that if you go through a platform, it's a lot easier because they handle the distribution.
Yes, definitely. Now, just be mindful that whatever platform that you use, there's free versus paid, and there's a lot of different technologies that are there on the marketplace. I've always used the platform Blueberry. And I've always used that platform. That was a platform that one of my mentors many years ago was using for theirs as well. There's Libsyn. I haven't used Libsyn, but they are another company that I know, a lot of my colleagues recommend too. Now, there are some free platforms such as Anchor. And then there are some other free platforms that also allows you to have websites and a whole lot of other stuff within that too. But again, be mindful about where you build your brand, build your assets, build your content, because if it's on a third party platform, you don't own that. So if they shut you down or for some reason their money, their income doesn't sustain the building of their business, or some platforms build to sell, if they can't find and they shut down, what happens to all of your content? So I always say try and have your own website, and then whatever platform that you decide to host, because you do need a platform to host. Blueberry is a great platform and has the packages. If you're building a business, you want to start it off in the right foot, that you won't get shut down. That can integrate well with your WordPress website as well, and that sends out that post sends it out to all of the podcast players, such as Apple and Spotify and Stitcher and all of those, Android and Google Play, and
I think I mean, I don't know about you, but I get contacted all the time.
Yes,
especially on LinkedIn from app developers.
Yeah,
we're developing a new app. It does this. It does that. The majority of them, when I go back 9 months later, are gone.
Yeah.
I hate to say that, but it's true. Because a lot of times they're just reinventing a wheel that's already been invented. But I do think it's important to go with established names, with established players, especially if you're new to the podcasting, because that's stressful enough already.
Yeah.
Right. It's for folks who use Kajabi. Kajabi's now doing podcast hosting. And again, they're new to that, but my experience of them as a company has been good.
Yes.
Right. And they've been around for a long time. So I might assume that, this would be as high quality performing a platform as the rest of what I use for them. But, be careful, guys. Don't just give your information out and your content out, especially when it's, you don't know country of origin. You don't know where it's going. We have all heard horror stories.
Yeah.
Of people's content being stolen, reused, and locked from them.
Yeah. Being a that's my background, a brand strategist. And so one of the things that I will always say is be mindful about where your voice and who's sharing that voice. And on some of those free platforms, what they do to monetize is they put their own ads within the podcast. We had that because we started using Blog Talk Radio back in 2008. We used that platform for 2 years, and that's how they would monetize. They'd add an ad in the beginning, and I think at the end as well. And so your listeners assume that you validate, that particular message, and oftentimes we don't know what ad. Obviously they're going to pitch something to do with business, but I don't know who that business is. And so, just be mindful, as we've said.
Yes. Now how? So the word strategy, the word strategy and plan keeps coming up. And I know for a lot of my Pilates teacher clients in my mastermind, they prior to coming to me, never actually did a lot of planning or strategizing. It was more like, okay, we teach Pilates. And then they would just kind of randomly come up with pricing and packaging and class themes. Seriously, just like throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what'll stick. Was basically how they did it. And once we start talking about the website and the social media and the emails and the blog or the copy or whatever else is being part of a strategy, obviously the podcast fits in there as well. So do you recommend that people really work on their strategy first before starting a podcast?
Yes.
Or, yeah.
Absolutely, because the best plan and strategy will come by having a clear end in mind. And what I mean by having a clear end in mind is that your podcast, the content, the frequency, the topics that you share will be dependent on where you want to lead people. If you think of your podcast as being a way that you can connect with someone along the customer journey, meaning that they are searching for specific content because they have an issue. There's a problem. For instance, if you take your case, Linda, you know that you deal with, or we know that you deal with people, particularly who are over 50, experiencing osteoporosis and starting to experience ongoing back pain. So you know that someone who's going to be looking is going to maybe be Googling sort of back pain. Then imagine she finds your podcast and she has a listen. There's a beautiful call to action, or maybe even go and listen to that podcast episode if you haven't already. So she goes and listens to that, and then she's subscribed. And then there's a beautiful call to action at the end. Grab it and access to it, maybe a checklist, and within that email sequence that she's now part of, she also gets access to the videos that you have, maybe some other podcast interviews or ones that you've done yourself. These are all beautifully and strategically developed into your keep in touch. And so does that mean once that's set up, you know where she's going to go? And so we've also got to think, when we're looking at the customer journey, there are some people who are quick buyers. They're fast decision makers. They hear about you, they go, Linda, I want to hire you, and I want to hire you privately. Do you do that? Yes, I do. Here's information. Then you've got others who kind of mosey along. They'll wait to the third time that they have a back pain, and there may be a fourth, and they go, I really need to go and do Linda's, course or whatever it is. So you've got a number of different touch points that will nurture people along that buyer's journey, that customer journey. But you're using that podcast as a way to continue to be top of mind, build know, like, and trust, and a beautiful call to action for those who are ready to take that step. Now, it seems really simple when I say it like that, but I don't know about you, and I know I put my hand up. We get distracted by all of the bright and shiny, and then all of a sudden, I'm going to switch my topic because that one didn't quite land yet, not realizing that you just needed to tweak it a little bit, and then it would go. And then, our message changes and we're not clear in our audience. So, so that's often what you want to work on. End in mind. What content are you going to put in there? What are some of your core pieces of thought leadership, your thought leader pillars, if you will? Do you have those in place so that people can get off the podcast, then continue to be nurtured? And once you've got that set up, a lot of that can then be automated, and then you just spend time doing the live streams, launching the podcast, the audio versions of that, and continuing to nurture those listeners into leads.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. See, that's another way, my friends, of repurposing content, right? Repurposing content. All of us are tired of creating content. Everyone I know, right? We're just tired of creating it all the time. Several times a day. Pithy statements under our awesome photos, right? I mean, what hashtags do we use? Half the time I forget, and I end up hashtagging in comments.
Right?
I'm just so excited to get the pics on. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, right, people search by hashtags, so maybe there should be some hashtags. But so podcasts then become something that you can continue to share.
Yes.
You have
You
links
have
to
links
them
to them
everywhere.
You
share
can
them
share them regularly.
And
And
it's the truth, right? That most people don't actually see our content.
That's
So they
right.
might not see it until the 8th time you actually repost it.
Yes, exactly right. And, right from the word, years and years ago, because I have had the opportunity to interview many different business owners, I was incorporating the lessons that they were actually teaching me. And so, it goes from the title of your podcast, even actually the name of your podcast makes a significant difference. And there's, the argument, if you will, or the discussion, should I have a personally branded podcast name, or should the podcast name be something that's searchable, that's keywords, that will give SEO the boost? And one of the things that I always say to people is be mindful, and this is the lessons that I learned from so many of my colleagues and guests who are business brokers and business development consultants, who said that you create a business as if you were going to sell it. Now, I always thought, I never want to buy, sell my business and so forth. Same with a podcast, though. Create a podcast that down the track you build such a valuable asset that someone will want to buy that off you. Now, and I'll give you an example. Ambitious Entrepreneur Shows, the podcast that I mentioned, was the award-winning one, and I got bored because my message got lost in the noise of my own podcast, and I got sick and tired of people talking about hack this and hack that. I thought, I just need to take a break. So I announced online on Facebook that I was going to close it down. And I was surprised because people were messaging me saying, would you consider selling it? And I thought, I wouldn't know, number one, but the fact that people would, I think it was over half a dozen actually, but I thought about it. I'd built a name, I'd built a following. I had not called it the Annmarie Cross Show, which meant that because it was the Ambitious Entrepreneur Show, others, I could have brought someone in and kind of co-hosted for a little while, introduced them to my audience, and then they could have taken over. So be mindful that the asset you're creating could be something that you can sell down the road. Your podcast, along with your business, the website, the audience, community, the database that you're building. And so, the name of your podcast can make a difference. Every single episode, if you've got keywords in there that your ideal clients are going to search, then that is going to, support in SEO. So all of these things make a huge difference. Do you have comprehensive show notes or not? These are all things that you can weigh out. But once you create a piece of content that can continue to be discoverable on an ongoing basis, and then you don't necessarily need to create podcast episodes that are 20 to 30 minutes. You can do a 5 or 10 minute. You can even do a 3 or 4 minute one. It depends. As long as it's valuable. That's one of the things I say, Linda. If you have a podcast episode and it's going to take you 5 minutes to share, take 5 minutes to share it. Don't drag it out to 10, 20 minutes because you'll lose, your audience. And so, I hope that answered your question. It becomes this discoverable piece of content that your ideal client will find when they're looking and searching online for a resource that you've got the answer to their problem and in the solution to support them.
And I encourage people to really use all of these tools that we have. I mean, back in the day, it was an ordeal to get TV and radio placement.
Yeah.
And I used to get it. I had clients who were great PR people. And I was very lucky. I knew enough to jump and say yes, even when it was completely inconvenient to show up on the set or to have people over filming. But you name it, I did it. It was like I would cancel clients, jump in the car, and they did my makeup, so I didn't have to worry about it, and go be on TV because that's what you had to do. Being on the radio was the same thing. You actually had to show up. There was none of this, not a lot of like phone radio going on. You actually had to be in the studio while they were recording. And now we have the ability to do this.
Yeah. We create our own platforms. I invested in a 12-month, it was a high-end PR course. It was valuable. It really was. And so I learned a lot. But what I also learned was there's no way that I'm going to chase the prospect of trying to get on someone else's show. And I thought, I'm just going to build my own. And that's exactly what I did. Build your own platform that continues to be discoverable 24/7, 365 days a year. Because often that minute or 2 minutes or however long that you have to answer that TV host or radio host often has a finite space of time that it exists, and you don't know how much of the audience that they have are your ideal clients. Plus, you're also being interviewed through the lens of the core values of that particular channel, whatever that may be. And if they don't necessarily agree with you on your values, that's fine. You can respect them. But are your ideal clients actually going to be listening and watching that? So you need to be mindful of that as well. So you might be speaking to an audience that really aren't your ideal clients. So those are all things. Create your own platform, be the star of that, and then bring other people to that and share the platform. It's far more fun having collaborations that way, I think.
Oh, I think so too. Collaboration is part of the joy, I think, of working in the online space.
Yes.
I find, it's much easily to collaborate. And if you're in the right rooms with the right people, like we are, we easily find folks who can work with us.
Yeah. And if someone was for me, someone that I heard or complained and I knew she was your ideal client, I would have absolutely no hesitation saying you need to go and look at these videos and then reach out to Linda, because she's got years of experience to support you. That's the kind of thing that you continue to create, isn't it? You're building your reputation equity. And people will share that. Then they'll find the resource. And what an opportunity to have this incredible content that is nurturing and building know, like, and trust, to the point when people do reach out to you, Linda, they feel like they know you already. I'm sure you get that with some of the live streams that you're doing. The business opportunities that are coming out of that, they're already building know, like, and trust. And you have not even probably yet had an opportunity to speak to them. Yet here they are engaging with you and knowing and learning more about you.
Exactly, because it's like, if you want to know how I teach Pilates, you can go on my YouTube channel and it's there. If you want to know my approach to business and my approach to the business coaching and Pilates Teacher Mastermind and my mindset work, it's all there. If you want to see my collaborative interviews with people about all the things that we need to be doing to grow our businesses online and stay sane at the same time, they're all there as well. But it's true. I've had people contact me for jobs who didn't even require an interview or any kind of like testing situation, because they just went through all my content.
Yes.
However, what I do find kind of disturbing, and I'm saying this to some of the younger folks in the room, is the content there for you to actually
look at.
When we
get messages that make it very clear that you have not looked at any of the content, it makes me not want to talk to you.
Seriously,
because so much out there that I'm like, how could you be?
Yes.
Truly. Now, Annemarie, you have some programs
that
help people launch their podcasts,
that help people position their brand. So talk to me about what you offer and how people can get in touch with you to work with you.
Oh, thank you, Linda. So what I have just done is I've had some separate programs. And what I mean by separate programs, had some that help people build their core business foundations, their message, their offerings, those kind of things. And those are the things that, as you mentioned earlier, was so important. You've already alluded to that, being clear on the end in mind, getting all of those foundations in place. Then you're able to launch your podcast. And so what I've now done is combine them all together in one place where people can get support. Because once you launch your podcast, often it's like, yay, and then it's, well, what do I do now? Do you want to add social audio into that? Do you want to add live streaming into that? Do you maybe want to? So it's a lot of other things as well. That's all inside what I call the Influence Alliance. So theinfluencealliance.com, and it has everything from whether you're just starting out in business, because I work with a lot of coaches, and there's nothing worse than being certified and you're so excited because you know now you can support so many more people. And it's like, well, congratulations, now you're a certified XYZ, go and build your business. And by the way, if you want to start a podcast, great way to build visibility. And it's like, where do I start? What are the steps? So that's really what the Influence Alliance is there, step by step, so that you don't get overwhelmed. You know, you don't have to do all of the things, you know, add them, layer them. As you learn, as you layer your learning and build momentum, then you can add things on top of that. But that's a great place to start, theinfluencealliance.com.
Great.
Great. And so the best place for people to reach you is your website or on social?
Well, social is good too. So we are now streaming live on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a platform that I really love, or Instagram. We're here too. So if they want to connect and DM me, maybe there is some questions that they have, I'd be more than happy to answer that. If the information on the website isn't, you know, they may have some more questions. I do also have private clients as well, but I would recommend DM me and let's set up a time to chat to find out a little bit more about where they're at, what their goals and visions are, what they've done before. It may just need some tweaking, but happy to chat a little bit more privately about some private work that I could work with them if they're ideal, if they're a good fit.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. For talking to us about podcasting, the importance of it, how to do it, why, and how to fit it in as part of our business strategy. As Pilates teachers, other coaches, fitness professionals, and so basically anyone starting a business online.
Yeah. You're welcome. It's been such a pleasure.
Yes, it's been great to see you. I am going to come off of the Instagram live and stop the live streams, just hang out for a moment after.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you once again so much for joining me. This week is kind of exciting. We had Annmarie. We're going to be talking to Jennifer Corcoran, who is a LinkedIn strategist for folks who need some work on LinkedIn. I think it's quite a few of us. And we've got Christmas coming up. It's a little crazy. Everybody have a fabulous rest of your Sunday. Have a great week, great holidays, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.